Hey, welcome to What Could Go Wrong. We are hanging out today with Lois, who is my buddy in dyslexia, my dyslexia buddy. And we are talking about mindset today as it applies to all kinds of, everything, really. But as it applies to learning differences and education, those types of things. So Lois, I stumbled onto you, I believe, in LinkedIn because you were talking about dyslexia, right?
That is right. Yes.
And I was like, I need to be your friend. How do we become best friends? Something like that.
Definitely, we need to be best friends. Yes. I am dyslexic. You said you're ADHD. I'm dyslexic. I grew up a long time ago. I'm old now. I grew up reading words without comprehending.
I mean, that sounds hard.
It allowed me to survive school, and that's all it was. Survive, never thrive. But it stopped me from being the total dummy. And a lot of the work I could do because it tells you it was all skill-based.
Okay.
And it was only when I got to about 6th or 7th grade and I was starting to do comprehension where my grades dropped. But I knew I couldn't comprehend.
Yeah. You know, I realized that we are streaming at the same time as, what is it now? What are we streaming at the same time as?
The Euro Cup semi-finals. England versus Denmark, and there's about to be a penalty shootout after 95 minutes. Well, 1-1. And Wimbledon
sports.
So you'll have to come and say hello to us over here.
I mean, yay sports. Hey, Chris, what's up, friend? Apparently there's a soccer game. Wait, or is it football? I don't know what it is.
It depends on where you're from as to what you call it.
Okay, so I can call it soccer, right?
Yes, so do I.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, perfect. All right. So tell the people who you are.
I am Lois Letchford, and I became a reading specialist through circumstances, really, because my second son, Nicholas, failed first grade in 1994. And when I say failed, I mean, at the end of the year, you'd go through the normal process of testing. He could read 10 words. He had no strength and he had a low IQ. And that's a really disastrous year for a child. And the documentation tells you, really, you have no hope. And that's the saddest part. And the teachers then saw him as, just a slow kid. He's isolated in the classroom. He stares into space. He has no friends. And no one helps him at all. Because why? He's just a slow kid. He wouldn't know any different.
Yeah, just push him off to the side. Totally fine. That makes perfect sense.
What could go wrong?
Nothing.
What could go wrong? And that was, even now, it moves me to tears that he was so alienated that no one saw any worth or any value in him. And no one could see anything but a dumb kid. And when the testing was done, I remember the diagnostician saying, I had to call his name 3 times before he answered me. He shut down in the testing. He said, I'm not doing this for you.
I mean, I can relate to that.
Yeah, he knew he couldn't do it, so why try? Why bother? And then the school takes, well, he's had a terrible year in school. He can't do anything. And he can't, so what? And what I could see and what I knew and what upsets me is that he bit his fingernails and he wet his pants. And the teacher shouted at him. And nothing changed. No one bothered. It's all right. He's just a small kid. So, yes, Chris, I'd rather watch paint dry too after an hour of the soccer. 1-1. It's pretty dull. They've got to have a penalty shootout to see who wins.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, that's another world. But that was the world that took me into learning disabilities. And we got out of it through an unusual set of circumstances. And so there was a drive that really pushed me to say, this is maybe not as acceptable as you think. Because when a child is 6, you can't see their future.
Yeah.
Irrespective of the IQ test and any testing that's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's, yeah. Now, you read my book, Chelsea, or part of it.
Mm-hmm. I did. Yes. Yes. I
Moving.
mean, so tell us about your book. Like, what are you doing now? So you went through this with Nicholas, and what happened? Is he still in first grade, or like,
Well, he
where
was
are
in
we
first
now?
grade in 1994, so it's a long-term story. And, where do we start? That was the start of it. And then in 1995, my husband, who's a professor, had study leave in Oxford, England for 6 months. So I took Nicholas out of school for 6 months and started with a series of books called Success for All, and they were a disaster. So I'm there with a blank slate. What do I have to do with this child?
So Success for All books were unsuccessful?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Just checking.
Yes, that's right. And so you have a blank slate and you just think, well, I've got to do something. And my mother-in-law was with me and she said, Lois, make learning fun. And that became my mantra.
Yeah.
And I started to write simple poems, and the simple poetry was transformative. It's giving him the right dose in the right quantities that he can take on.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always reading, writing, getting rhyming with, and illustrating poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And because we're in Oxford, England, you're seeing a lot of things, and I'm writing about what we're seeing. Double O comes up as in Cook, Look and Book, and I thought of Captain Cook, Captain James Cook, and the last of the great explorers. And Nicholas got on board. We saw this map of the world from 1550, and I said, look, Nicholas, there's a gap in the map. There's no Australia. And he started to ask questions I could not answer. Who came before Captain Cook? Well, that's easy, Nicholas. That was Christopher Columbus. And who came before Columbus? I didn't know. In fact, I hadn't even thought about it. And I needed that question to see that he didn't have a low IQ.
Mm-hmm.
That was number one. My child doesn't have a low IQ. I'm not interested in anything else. So we've got to teach him to read. That was the start. We go back to Australia. We go back to school. And I saw the person who had done the testing and said, Nicholas has asked these amazing questions. We've had so much fun learning. And she stood there, she put her hands on her hips and said, well, he's the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching.
Why is this human a teacher?
Sorry?
Why is this human a teacher? Like, we just give up quite so easily? That's a thing that we do?
Yeah, she was the diagnostician. But the diagnostician and the reading teacher had obviously been talking. And the reading teacher said, well, he's gone backwards over the last 6 months. And she could only see the numbers of letters and sounds that he knew. And she couldn't see his thinking.
Right.
And he was making, steps in decoding, but his thinking just was astronomical.
Mm-hmm. And you can't measure, right? And that's much more challenging, the measurability of that. So then the teachers aren't holding that to, then it's just too abstract.
Yes, that's right. And that teacher, then the reading teacher sends him home with sight words to learn, and she's now sending home 10, not 20. For a child you just called the worst child I've seen in your 20 years of teaching. And she gave him the same 2 sentences as she gave every other child in her care.
Mm.
Now,
so no individualization?
And she's teaching him one-on-one.
Oh, boy.
So, the disaster went on. And, okay, Nicholas learned to read. He stayed in school. He had fantastic classroom teachers, phenomenal classroom teachers. And I was able to fix up anything he had a problem with in school. I would do a little activity at home that would help him. and he would grow. And within about 3 or 4 months of Oxford and working at home, he independently reads. And that was the start. That was a big relief to me.
Yeah, yeah. So you've made progress already at this point past what the diagnosticians said he would need.
Yes. I go back to become a reading specialist because of what had happened with Nicholas and what had been said to him really put me in a position to say, we can teach kids to read. I go back and do my studies, and one of the papers that was a set paper was called Beyond the Deficit Theory, written by Brian Campbell and published in 1990. And it said, when children fail to learn to read, the first thing we say to them is, well, look at their IQ, look at their home background, look at this, look at that, look at the other, as opposed to what do we have to do to teach them? And that's exactly what had happened to Nicholas. Yeah. So that really became my driving philosophy. And then Kurt Dudley Marling is another person who I've taken on board, and his philosophy is that learning and learning problems dwell in activities and cultural practices and not in the heads of individuals. To me, it's not entirely right, because children on the autism spectrum see concretely, not absolutely, but we've got to notice that. We've got to know that. But the rest of it is, what else do I have to do to teach this child to read?
Right, right. Start asking better questions. I think that's kind of the basis of that, right? If what you're focusing on or what you're given is not working, maybe get a little bit more curious and ask better questions.
Yes. And then it became, what goes wrong in the reading process. Look at what the child is doing or look at what we're teaching, and have the two connect rather than have them separate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was the start of the story. And by the time 1999 comes along, Nicholas is 11. He's done very well in Australia. He's in the 5th grade, reading on a 3rd grade reading level, reading 20 minutes a night. Everyone's happy. Why? Because he has exceeded expectations.
Right.
And in 1999, my husband takes a job in the place called Lubbock, Texas.
Did you ever say y'all?
Obviously, we said y'all. And what did we get? We had our pictures made.
You had your pictures made. Oh my gosh.
That's a Lubbock.
Very Lubbock of you. Yes.
Yes. So that was fascinating. And when I wrote the chapter for Lubbock, Texas, or the section, I titled it A Spring in the Desert, because we left our beautiful Brisbane, which is blue sky, green, multicolored flowers, to go to Lubbock that is flat and brown and boring.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, I'm not disagreeing.
What is it? And what do they say? There's not a hill or a tree to spoil the view.
Oh boy, that's true. There will be no trees to get in the way of all the dirt that you're looking at.
But it took Nicholas from the bottom to the top.
Hmm.
And there you come to mindset. What happened? Why did it happen? What made Nicholas grow in this place that was so remote? But it's a university town. So, we can look at the geography of Lubbock, but it's a university town, and they bring a certain mindset with them that everyone's going to succeed. And so, so that was the real start.
So what was the mindset? What were the pieces that started to feed into this shift?
Well, the first was the principal, because Nicholas is in 5th grade, and she said, I don't think he should go into 5th grade. We expect too much of kids. I think he'd be better off in 4th grade. And then he will take away more from the classroom. And my husband said, well, won't there be a problem when he graduates? Won't he be too old? And she said, oh, yes, that'll be a problem. But we've got this class in middle school where we can do grades 7, 8, and 9 in 2 years. So we'll spend longer in elementary school. He'll catch up in middle school, and he'll be in high school like everyone else. That's exactly what happened.
I like
the schooling system was flexible. And that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, that's true.
So that was the first. Nicholas went to school and he came home on the first day and he said, we've got a reading program to do. I've got to read a book and take a set of questions, answer the questions. It was the accelerated reader program, which most people hate.
Yeah.
Nicholas came home and he read from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night, 5 and 6 nights a week.
Wow.
Being in Lubbock is like looking at a piece of plywood, flat and boring. That's it. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And at that rate, even though you read 2 hours a night, you're never going to catch up.
Right.
And he's reading one Goosebumps book over that 10-hour or 12-hour period. So what happens next is, because you travel distances in Lubbock, I said to the librarian, the boys fight in the car, and she said, yes, they do. Listen to books on CD.
Yeah.
And the libraries were full of books. So we listened. Now Nicholas is taking in the language of his peers at the same rate of his peers. We're listening to books and books and books all the time. If you're behind and you've got a language problem, what do you have to do? You've got to listen to catch up.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I mean, it's simple yet profound. I mean, because we do the same thing. When we were traveling to school, when people still did that, we were playing Harry Potter books in the car. We would drive 30 minutes, listen to Harry Potter, drive 30 minutes home, listen to Harry Potter, right? And luckily, you never run out of Harry Potter. It goes on and on and on and on.
The first book we ever listened to was Aliens Ate My Homework. Have you listened to that?
I remember reading it, but I didn't listen to it.
It was a single narrator, but the voices that man did were phenomenal, and you would never, ever have known it. Never.
Gabe wants to know if Nicholas has a southern drawl now.
Nicholas made a point of never losing his Australian accent. We were in Texas from 1999 to 2007. And
he was like, I will have my Australian accent.
That's exactly. And it made him different. The eldest came later. The eldest had a Texan accent and still does, but he can switch between the two. Nicholas is still Australian. Yes. I
can't switch anywhere.
Now he's been in the UK for nearly 9 years. So he's now got an interesting accent.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit of an accent, but if I go to travel, I have family in South Louisiana. So the closer that I get to my family in South Louisiana, the thicker that my accent gets.
Yes.
And then depending how long I stay there, depends on how long the remnants of this accent will exist.
They say the same of us when we come back from Australia.
Okay. Yeah. It's thicker.
Yeah.
So
the other thing that happened, because Nicholas was Australian, he was different. In Australia, he had no friends. No one cared about him. He's just a slow kid. You come to Texas, they want to hear him talk.
Yeah.
And his class,
it's unique. It's exciting.
That's right. His classroom teacher was doing a series on tall tales. And he came home one day quite distressed and he said, Mum, they ask if we've got a koala up every tree. And I said to him, Nicholas, of course you do. And the next thing I know is the children are coming to me and are saying, how did you get to America? Did you really ride on the back of a whale?
Oh, boy.
And so Nicholas's sense of humor is starting to explode.
Yeah.
And people are talking to him and he has to respond. If you've got a language problem, you're now practicing in language.
Right. And I think it's often a common misunderstanding that dyslexia only affects reading, right? It is a language deficiency as a whole.
Exactly. Yes, it is. It's a language deficiency. Yeah.
And that can be very challenging, for people to understand. So, for example, my youngest will sometimes go to say something very simple and can't like
Get it out.
Right? And so as an example, my oldest is she's high achieving. She's always been like forward, right? So what she lacks in her social skills and awareness, right, she makes up for in academic intelligence and that type of thing. But she will get frustrated. So for an example, my youngest was trying to ask her for scissors to cut out temporary tattoos. Okay. And Phelan is sitting at her desk, my oldest, and the scissors are in the drawer. And so my youngest is coming to her saying, "Can I have your scissors?" And Phelan is saying, "Why?" Right? Because she's an older sister and she just has to, poke at it a little bit. And Alea's like, "I just need them. I need the scissors," and they got into this whole thing where Phelan's like, "Just say why." And Alea's like, I can't, I just need the scissors. Right. And so I walk in and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And, they explained it to me. And I kind of looked in the bathroom, saw what was going on and said, "Hey, do you need the scissors to cut out the temporary tattoos?" And Alea's like, "Yes." And my oldest was like, "Why didn't you just say that?"
Because we don't
go. Yeah, so I have to go back to my oldest and explain, like, okay, this is what, it's bigger than these pieces. And we've had this conversation before, but again, it's so often simply correlated to reading, the intake of communication, where it's also a similar struggle for the expression as well.
Expressive language and receptive language.
Right.
What's coming in and what's going out, and you've got to have in before you have out.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicholas, it's really still obvious today that he has a significant problem if it's a new subject field, new subject matter, and he really has to think about the answer. He's slower to respond.
Right. Yeah.
His answer will be phenomenal when you get it there, but it's slower.
Yeah.
And people make very quick judgments about whether a person is really smart or not smart by the speed of their speech.
Correct.
And so,
And since I'm ADHD and I speak like at 100 miles a minute, does that mean my IQ is like off the charts, or like what do I get for that? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna take that.
Still looks slower today, and people do make judgments, irrespective of his PhD, because unless they don't know that.
Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah, that's a whole nother. Okay, so we've made it to Lubbock, and now we're switching his mindset. And one piece that fed into that was the flexibility of the school system. So what else kept building his mindset?
Nicholas wanted to build with Connects. Now, Connects is a building toy.
Mm-hmm,
and I put some pictures up. And we bought him some sets, and he built what was on the box, and he built a few other things, and then he said, "What else do I do?" I said, "Nicholas, start building the Sydney Harbour Bridge." And he built it. And then his father comes along. His father's an engineer, academic engineer, and he said, "Nicholas, we've got to do ... dot. And then it went from average to phenomenal. And so Nicholas took his buildings to the school. He became the star of the school. And he's building mathematical knowledge.
Yeah.
When they did some mathematics in school, he would come home and build ... It was quite amazing to watch him grow. And he would spend hours building all the time with a book on CD, often Hank the Cowboy on what he's building.
But he's experiencing success.
Success after success, yes. So, and the audio books were brilliant. I think there's 9 points that I make in the book. The next one is the speech therapist is in the classroom, and we have to get reassessed for special education. He doesn't qualify because there's no gap between IQ and performance.
But did he not have a diagnosis of dyslexia?
No, he's through dyslexia, and we have to be retested. He had a specific learning disability in Australia. New place, get tested again, no gap, because we wanted this 15-point gap to show that you've got a disability. And if you don't have a gap, you have no disability. The speech therapist was in the classroom, and she said, "He's one of mine. I want to test him." She tested him, and he comes out as second percentile speech language impaired. So he's age 11 and a half, and his ability to deal with language is that of a 5.5-year-old child.
Yeah. On that topic, wouldn't it, just to kind of, I know we disagree with the 15-point gap being the only regulator, the qualifier for, having a learning difference. Here's my question on that, right? A learning difference, if you have it for an extended period of time, even just for several years as a child, you're going to build coping mechanisms to function. So wouldn't it make sense that you may have built unhealthy coping mechanisms to allow yourself to complete that, like reading, but not truly comprehending, and still have a learning difference, even if you close that 15-point gap?
Well, he would never have had a gap because his language, everything you test, all IQ tests are done in, require excellent language skills. What doesn't he have? Excellent language skills. He gets, when he comes to 21 and he's doing his undergraduate degrees, we get him retested. So 10 years on again. And the deficit still in the language area places him in the bottom 5th percentile of the population. When do you need this sort of stuff? Okay, what are we looking at? We're looking at ability to recall isolated, abstract, irrelevant words, the sight words. The ability to manipulate language and manipulate sounds, not manipulate language, to manipulate sound. When do you need it? When you're learning to read.
Can we get them to change the name of sight words to what you just said, isolated, irrelevant, abstract words? Can we get them to change it? That would be great. That'd be fun. Let's do that.
Yeah. Because it's the way we teach them that causes the problem. It's not that, the children speak these words. Every child I teach has English as their native language. They should never be taught by rote.
Correct.
Never.
Yes. Rote there is no value. I mean, what is the value of rote memorization?
We're finished with that. And so Nicholas has this extreme, and as I said, I think 2011, he gets tested again. 5% for the ability to recall words and to manipulate language, the phonemic awareness. Mathematics, science knowledge places him diametrically opposed. In fact, his spatial awareness placed him on the 99th percentile.
Wow.
Anything with mathematics and science was 80th and 90th percentile and above. He's extreme. So the speech therapist did us a huge favour in having him tested and had support, but it showed the problem was in the learning to read, not in learning.
That's a great thing to show, though. Now we're finding out more information.
And when he goes to high school, he's exited from special education, he's learning in the classroom, he's thriving in the classroom, and he, ends up in graduating the top 20% of his class. Phenomenal teachers.
Yeah, so that was another piece of that mindset shift, was the flexible school and the teachers coming in and really being supportive and digging into that support that he needed there, relationship.
And the amount of work he had to do to get there, the amount of work was, phenomenal. He wasn't doing a norm. He was doing plus. And that was just Nicholas. He has a drive to succeed.
And he also experienced success outside of reading. I mean, he experienced in other places and began to feel what that feels like, which is a huge thing. So Drew says, what happens when you end up carrying those coping mechanisms for 30 more years before you find out you have a gap? Your psychiatrist is like, hey, Chelsea, did you know you have ADHD? And I'm like, I have ADHD? And he's like, oh, 100%. And I'm like, but I'm 31.
Yes.
So that's what happens.
Yes. Yeah. Because it took me until I was 39 to recognize I had a learning disability.
Yeah. So
it
is a difference, Drew. I mean, most often I don't refer to them as a deficiency, but rather just you have a difference in the way that you learn. But yeah, I mean, I was 30 when my psychiatrist, whoever the person was like, you have ADHD. And I was like, nah. He's like, oh yeah, you do. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we live with it, don't we? And we compensate. We compensate and we survive.
But I think it does require, like for me, even before I recognized that it was ADHD that I was dealing with, I understood that there were things that either I was processing differently or couldn't process very well. Like I was beginning, especially as I got older, to recognize these are my strengths. I do these things really well, better than my peers. But I have some very real weaknesses as well. Like real weaknesses also. And that I began to see this gap start to get larger and larger of what I could do well and what I really, really had a hard time doing. And that's where mindset started playing in a lot for me, because I had to start focusing on like my self-talk and what I was experiencing and how I was managing that for me. Because otherwise I would have been like, forget that, I can't, that's too hard.
I have to do exactly the same now. And my sister was talking to me one day and I said, well, I can't, I'm just dumb. And that comes back to when you're in school, because that's the only thing you thought. And even now, I have to work really hard to say you can.
Yeah. One of the schools that my daughter attended for a while, their big word was yet, like I can't yet, or that type of thing, and just adding that to the end. And that was their big mindset shift, like talking about, let's change our language, let's reframe that concept. And I think that's such a huge thing in mindset. And like what you were talking about with having flexibility, having with teachers who provide this basis of relationship, all of those things, and him experiencing success, all of those things start to build up this shift in mindset, especially the success portion. I mean, we used to, when I was in the classroom, even in early education, with 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds who were really struggling. I mean, they're not diagnosed at this point, but you begin to see indicators for ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, etc. And we were able to kind of jump in and work with them on mindset. We didn't jump in and say, we need to do more sight words, we need to do more rote memorization, et cetera, et cetera. It was like, okay, it was almost like we recognize you, we see you. We know you're going to have obstacles to overcome that are different than your peers. So the tools that we choose to give you at such a young age are these mindset tools. Let's find what you can be successful at. Let's find how we can encourage positive affirmations. Let's find out how to give you words that you can use when you're talking to yourself and you're experiencing that frustration. And so a lot of times we would give them something that they could be successful at, and they'd start the day out like with the connects, right? And let's immediately hit success. And they're experiencing that dopamine, right? They're working on that neurological pathway of success, and they get to experience over and over. And then they take that feeling into, the more challenging things, and it begins to shift that mindset a little bit at a time. And it was, I mean, it's amazing to see take place, especially in these tiny humans.
Cognitive restructuring has the trajectory altering. Yes, perfect, Drew. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of my son, Nicholas, or any child who's now failing, instead of seeing them as learning disabled, we should see them as future rocket scientists.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why like my language personally changes from learning disabled to learning different, because you're learning in a different manner, but usually it's pretty cool. I mean, you've had to build, I had this conversation with a boss of mine, and Jennifer would appreciate this. I see you're here somewhere. Or maybe not. I don't know where you are. Maybe
Jennifer?
You're here.
Jennifer Brick.
I saw her. I don't know. Okay, cool. So she might appreciate this. I had a boss who was not thrilled that I had anxiety. Okay. And it was something that I'm fairly open about, right? Especially with people that I work closely with. And many times it gives me a leg up, right? And because I already know all the things that are going to go wrong. I've already been there in my mind, right? I'm making those solutions, and then I'm able to address them. And so in my conversations with him, where he would try to tear me down for having anxiety or make me less than, you are less than because you have, right? You can't do. And my conversation was essentially kind of what Drew was talking about. Like, I have been building coping strategies for this for years and years and years before I even knew that I had it. So I can run circles around the people who have never had to experience these kinds of challenges, because I've been building up my coping strategies for this way longer than, way longer than you have.
Yeah.
Right? So it gave me almost like a leg up, because I knew going into it that I was going to experience a challenge, and I was ready in my mind to get over that, instead of being the one going into it saying, this is going to be super easy. And I was able to go into it with a different mindset.
Yeah. Which is the critical part, isn't it? It takes a while to get to that I need a different mindset. And I think we need to experience it. We need to hear it. We need to read about it. We need support doing it.
Right. Often it's awareness. I mean, it's not something that is kind of brought up, right? The first question when a learner experiences challenges is, how can we get your reading scores up? You need more sight words. Not, what does your self-talk look like? How are you framing this in your mind? What are you experiencing success in?
And how are we as teachers in a community impacting that child's self-awareness? Have we isolated them and said, you're not worthy of even having a friend?
Yeah.
Or have we given them a friend? Have we found a safe place in the classroom for them so that we can impact their self-talk and say, you're of value, it's okay?
Well, that requires a level of awareness for the educator, which is a whole different issue, right? Whether or not they have that, because they would have been given that by someone else in their life who would have had it, who would have had to have had it, and then there's that whole, thing. Like, speaking of coping strategies that may not have been healthy, like when I was a sophomore in high school, I was successful. I was in pre-AP classes, AP classes, whatever. I had good grades, etc. But I was bored out of my ever-loving mind. Like, I remember passing periods were 7 minutes. 7 minutes. And we had like 8 of them a day. I'm like, this is the biggest waste of time that has ever existed in the history of the universe. Like, I could not understand why we spent 7 minutes 8 times a day walking to another class when you can be there in 3 and start. It was just super frustrating. So after a while, that and other things, I'm sure. After a while, I convinced my mom to pull me out and let me homeschool myself. And I was like, please just buy me curriculum. Like, please don't make me do this anymore. It's the slowest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. Our passing periods are 7 minutes. This is ridiculous. And after enough begging, she was like, okay. And she did it. And, I graduated. I was 14, and all of that. But that was ADHD. I didn't know that. She didn't know that, right? That was me trying to cope with something that I didn't know what was going on, but was causing like extreme frustration in me.
And then most likely fed into your anxiety.
Probably, yeah. It's all fine. It's fine.
Yeah, you've got to think about what school is for. It's not just the teaching of reading and writing and all of those skills, which are absolutely foundational. But what else do kids learn in this whole process?
Right.
Are they learning they're of value?
Mm-hmm.
Are they
because they can be taught simultaneously. You can teach them about reading and that they're valuable through the methods of, how you're delivering that information.
Yes. Like you said about your last reading teacher or your daughter's reading teacher.
I mean, anybody who makes a comment to a child who just failed, whatever they were supposed to be doing, did not complete it in the way that someone structured it for them. And their response is, well, if you would have done it the way that I told you to, I'm like, okay, let's work on your awareness first. And then and then we'll work on the other. Like, I have so many questions. Are there not more than one way? Is there not more than one way to complete a task? And are we only allowed to do it your way? And is that because your ego is too big, or because you're not creative enough to think of another solution that the student who has a learning difference just thought of? I have all these questions. These are all my questions.
Yes. And
they did not appreciate my questions, just saying.
And what has the child learned through that experience?
Do it the way that the adult says, otherwise you're failing. Your creative solutions are not solutions.
Have they learnt the skill then that was asked, or have they only learnt do what the teacher says?
Through the teacher says.
Yeah. And we haven't created a skilled reader. We haven't created a skilled reader. We haven't allowed the child to understand what went right or went wrong. We've given the child a check mark or a cross mark and said it's right or wrong. And that is the worst sort of teaching that we need.
Right.
You know what's fascinating to me is Nicholas got his PhD in 2018. And at that time, I thought, I'll be able to ask Nicholas what happened in grade 1. You know, he's had so many great years in school.
Yeah.
And I said to him, Nicholas, what happened? My son cried and he couldn't put any words together talking about first grade. That was the first thing. And I thought, well, let's not go there because I'm not skilled at doing that. And I said, Nicholas, tell me about the learning you and I had in Oxford. And it was like a flip switched in his brain. A flip switch? A flip
switch. I totally caught it. I didn't even, if you wouldn't have said it, I would have been like right on there with you.
A switch flipped in his brain. And he smiled and he laughed and he said, you wrote these poems, and he named the poems that I wrote. And he said, and we learned about Captain Cook. And learning about Captain Cook taught me to love learning, and I never, ever want to stop learning. And then he started to giggle. And and he's giggling, and he said, and it was a 7-year-old giggle, you wrote a poem about the witch's spell. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, we wrote the ingredients for it. And now he's roaring with laughter because they were so funny. Now, what's interesting about this from my point of view is that incident about writing a witch's spell is not in my book. I didn't write about it because the poem I wrote was not worthy of being published. What I ignored was Nicholas' response to that poem. I'm thinking I'm teaching the letters, spin, spot, spell, spit, spun. What he's learning is that I can write the witch's ingredients, and this is so funny, and it's a lesson he learned for life.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that so often what it is? I mean, I experienced this so many times when in early education, when you prepare this beautiful lesson and all of these wonderful things that all correlate together, and this wonderful, it's going to be a beautiful day of joy and wonder. And then they see a car out of the window while you're doing whatever you're doing. And then the rest of the day you're talking about cars. And it was the best day that the children ever had. They're talking about it for the rest of the year and correlating everything back to this car. And it had nothing to do with what you put on your lesson plan.
Exactly. That's exactly right, isn't it? Dr. Gwen, you're right, making you laugh. So what we teach them, what children are learning, what are our goals, and what happens, what the children are taking away with them, short-term and long-term, are maybe what we've written down. I mean, my story, I think, in my view, is such a lesson in mindset. Number one, mindset about teaching, about how we see children, what we can do for them, how we can help kids survive this world. Because no one in first grade ever thought Nicholas would achieve anything, let alone a PhD in applied mathematics.
Yeah. Isn't it sad that these labels are put on? Isn't it? Did you hear what I just said? Isn't it? Isn't it?
That's Texan.
Isn't it sad that these labels are put on learners so early? Isn't it?
Songs.
I wonder what label they would have given me.
From Dr. Gwen, songs and poem cause me to learn to read. That's exactly right. And it's the repetition, the rhyme, the rhythm, the relaxation. Have you heard of Dr. Mary Helen Immordino Yang?
I couldn't even say that back to you. So.
Her work is worth checking out. She's a brain scientist talking about the importance of social emotional learning and how emotion is tied to learning. It's not an optional extra, but when children are stressed, the brain shuts down. When children are relaxed, the brain actually accesses the memory more effectively.
Right. I mean, the concept of psychological safety.
Yes. And that's what I had done unwittingly with Nicholas. I tapped into his curiosity. He was relaxed. We could ask questions. We could take our time. And it's what I did with every other of my students. How am I going to teach this? Not what am I teaching? Yes, I have to teach this. So how am I going to do it that my student can walk away with it and know they can learn it? And if they didn't, what else do I have to do to have them learn whatever it is?
Well, I think a huge part of that would have been your mindset, right? I talk about a lot of the ego of the educator, right? So many times the educator comes in, they bring their ego and they have one way to teach. This is how I teach. This is how the student needs to learn. And we're not setting aside that there may be other ways the student needs to learn because we've been taught that this is how to do it. And if it doesn't fit inside of this program, this box, then the learner is not doing it correctly or whatever. And I think one big thing that I talk about a lot is the future of learning, or the future of education, or future of learning, future of education. That one is that we don't know the future of education. And I think it falls into the same thing for learners when we're engaging with them. If we go into it and say, this is the only way to do it, then we're bringing our ego and we're assuming their future and that they need to learn this way and they are going to learn this way and this is how it needs to happen. And what an egocentric thing to do, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't make sense.
My first student in Lubbock had spent 4 years in a phonics-only reading program. Dr. Gwen, you're right. When our hearts and spirits are touched, that's when, and that's exactly what Immordino Yang says, and hers is the brain research. So he spent 4 years in this phonics-only reading program. And the school kept saying, oh, he'll just have to do another year and another year, doing the same thing again and again and again. By the time he came to me, he's saying, I don't think she'll be able to teach me because I can't learn. And it's the standardized reading program that took into no account what that child was like, what he could do, what he couldn't do. He just didn't learn it the way it had been taught.
And now he's adopted that. He's adopted that as a personal failure. I can't learn. Not the curriculum could be wrong, but I am wrong, which is so sad.
And the amount of work that I have to do to break that mindset down that you can is amazing. Huge on my part. And feeding them, the right amount, and you can't overstep, because if you overstep, you lose them. So then you've got to, it's a real balance between you and them to then take these kids who have failed for so long and allow them to achieve. And my student in Texas, my first one, he got an honors degree in communication. And he lives in Fort Worth. He now lives in Fort Worth with his wife and 4 kids.
It's the magic of mindset. Ooh, that's what we should have called it. We could have called it the magic of mindset.
I love it. That's what we'll put up tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Gwen, you're awesome. I love your comments here. I think we should be connected if we're not. So
I agree.
Yeah, you're pretty awesome. And it looks like you're in transformational literacy leader. So for sure, we need to hang out. So there you go. So tell us, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you? What do you do? Tell us about your book, all those things.
Okay, because I follow my husband around the world, I couldn't teach in upstate New York, and Nicola's story just got better and better and better and better. So I completed my master's degree, and there's me. I said I'd like to write the story. Dyslexic, not only dyslexic, but it's lack of practice. with literacy and reading and writing. So I wrote it, but I had support and I paid for it. I paid for editors. Now I'm really delighted with my book, which you should have had out here, Reversed a Memoir, that's available on Amazon. The audio is available on Amazon and on my website. There's also a 5-minute clip of me reading the first chapter or so. And so that's what I do. I've written a reading program, writing program with some other people called Teaching Students with Dyslexia. So if you've got children who are still struggling, come to us and we can share that, because they need a tutor to work with our program, or us, take their pick. And
so do y'all still do tutoring? Y'all do tutoring?
Yes, I do. I love it. It's my passion. Do
you need a 9-year-old?
Always. It's the delight of my life to take kids who think they can't and show them they can. And how much fun can we have while we're doing it?
We need to have a bigger discussion around that, friend.
Yes, I just love it.
I may have a 9-year-old just for you.
Anytime. I just love it. Because it's what took Nicholas, the amount of work he did, and all my other students. Teaching in Lubbock, I have to say this, was really the best thing, because I ended up teaching the children who'd failed all reading programs. I'm teaching kids in elementary, middle, and high school. I had children from age 7 to 16. My 16-year-olds came to me with no words. They couldn't read anything. So you've got to engage them. And I had time to get between schools. So I had 15 minutes of think and reflection time. What we ignore, I think, throughout the whole of teaching is how much work it takes to reflect and think and then make future plans. So, so I call myself a literacy problem solver. I'm available on LinkedIn, my Facebook. My website is loisletchford.com, on Twitter. And I don't engage in reading wars. I just teach kids to read. I can't go down that path.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with me and talking about this and sharing some of Nicholas' story. And I hope that there's people who hung out with us and may watch us in the replay who this speaks to them and kind of gives them hope for me moving forward, and they can read your book or connect with you because, it's a big thing. Dyslexia and learning differences overall really are challenging, mindset specifically around getting past that, especially if you get stuck in it. So thank you so much, Lois, for hanging out. This was lovely.
I forgot to say about my YouTube channel, and we had a book trailer made the day Nicholas graduated with his PhD from Oxford, and it's tearjerker.
I will have to watch that. I haven't watched that yet.
No, it's worth its weight in gold.
I will definitely check that out.
Yes. So.
Well, thank you everyone who came to hang out with us. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I will see everyone next week on What Could Go Wrong. What could go wrong? It's fine. We'll always fix it. Dr. Gwen says she's teaching literacy in a summer camp for the city of Fort Worth. That's where I am. I'm right here somewhere. So that's pretty fun. Cool. I love when I find people who are actually in the same, state, city, country as me. That's fun when that happens. I
totally agree. I will connect, Dr. Gwen. I really look forward to it. That'd be great fun. Yeah.
I use Restream for my hosting because it lets me put it out on YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn and everywhere. So we have some Twitchers here. We have some LinkedIn people here. Thanks for hanging out with us. And we will see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Woohoo!